Good morning. Today we're going to continue with the 12 truths of the spiritual path, and we're going to talk about the second truth, which is the truth of desire. So the universal law that the truth of desire is related to is the principle of polarity. And we're going to talk briefly about the myth, the Hercules myth of the Cretan bull. So the principle of polarity in the Kabbalion states everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites, like and unlike are the same, opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet, all truths are but half-truths, all paradoxes may be reconciled. And what this means in a nutshell is whatever your truth is, or whatever you believe, or whatever you desire or judge, and we're going to talk a little bit about judgments and values today, actually, it's informing the other side of the coin, the other side of the pendulum swing, as in the image. And so when we judge things or we talk about our values, we can actually get a lot of information about what we really mean in terms of what this law states, that everything is just a half-truth. So I'd like to start with the Hercules myth of the Cretan bull. So this is Hercules' second labor. And again, I highly recommend that you get the book, The Labors of Hercules by Alice Bailey. This is what these 12 truths are rooted on, in addition to astrological principles and myths and symbols linked to astrology and mythology. And it's just a really informative book. She channeled this book by her Tibetan guide, and she talks extensively about symbolism, astronomy, constellations, and it's just a gem. So the Herculean myth of the Cretan bull is there is an island, and on this island there is a labyrinth, and it's actually a maze. So let me just pause for a moment. There's a big difference between labyrinths and mazes. Mazes are tricks. Mazes have several entrances, and you're meant to get lost in there. And the world is considered a maze. Whereas a labyrinth is actually our spiritual journey, one way in, one way out. When you reach the center, it's indicative of the center of self. And if you've never walked the labyrinth, I highly recommend visiting the labyrinthlocator.com, and you can put your zip code anywhere in the world and find labyrinths near you. You can also do finger labyrinths. You can Google any kind of labyrinths. There's goddess labyrinths, sharks labyrinths, Baltic labyrinths, man in the maze labyrinths, and you can actually walk them with your finger. And they represent the 4 lobes of the brain, connecting the right and the left hemispheres of the brain. And it's actually a contemplative practice, which is step 10, but you could do it here too. So in this myth, Hercules is told to go to King Minos's island, and in the maze, there is a bull, and the bull is the Cretan bull. And his job was not to kill the bull, but rather to bring it to the temple. And the temple is where the Cyclopses lived. The Cyclopses were the one-eyed creatures, and there's a lot of symbolism in this. So once he went and tried to capture the bull, and it took him quite a bit of time to actually get the bull, he was able to ride the bull, and this is very symbolic. The bull represents desires, and Hercules, representing spirit or the divine, is riding the desires. We don't kill our desires. We don't castrate our desires, which is oftentimes what happens, and that's why this truth is the truth of desire. We have to honor and acknowledge and validate what we desire. We cannot castrate it and kill it. And we'll see in the 8th truth, the truth of the shadow, that if you do that, the hydra just get bigger and bigger. So we really have to learn to dominate or control or balance the desires. And I'll show you an image of Venus in a moment where that symbolism represents this. He had to ride the bull to the temple. And the temple is representative of our divine being, our divine self. The Cyclops was at the temple to receive the bull of desire. So we're supposed to transmute, or at least raise vibration and raise consciousness around our desires. And our most desires that get us into trouble are sex, money, and power, and those type of, what we would maybe call the deadly sins, hubris and so forth, envy, gluttony. And so it's not about eliminating them, but first of all, of course, understanding them logically, and then transmuting the consciousness around them. And that's the symbolism of the temple, that we raise the awareness. And of course, the third eye being unity of mind, body, spirit, or the three bodies of man, is how we transmute the thought around the desire. So our first truth is thought. We have to see what it is that we're thinking, what occupies our thought. And now in the truth of desire, we're understanding that we have to give credence and airtime to those desires, but balance them with a spiritual path. So in mythology, bulls and cows represent creation. And this is seen in Hinduism, where Shiva, who's the goddess of destruction, and per se, if we destroy, then there's room to create, which is the idea of consciousness. If we can destroy our low-level consciousness and transmute it to a high-level consciousness, then we're inviting in Brahma, which is the god of creation. And he has what's called a vahana. A vahana in Hinduism is any animal vehicle. And if you see all of the gods in the pantheon in Hinduism, they're always with an animal. Ganesh, for instance, has the mouse. This is called a vahana. And Shiva rides the bull. So it's the same symbolism as Hercules riding the bull and taking it to the divine temple where the Cyclops are. To ride an animal in the ancient myth signifies control. The bull is not slaughtered. We don't slaughter our desires. That would be a lie. They don't go away. It is ridden and guided and under the mastery of man. Self-mastery, remember, is with balancing thought, identifying our purest thought. Then we can actually look at our desires, what they're validating in us, what they're trying to fulfill, and then we can move forward. And the lesson of this task, of this labor, is the lesson of proportion. So we see a lot in some of these traditions, in Buddhism and yoga, the limbs of yoga, right action, right thought. And a lot of people come to me and say, what is right action and right thought? Restraint, control. And they think that it's the swing of the pendulum. It's the 0 or the 100. And it's not. It's finding that midpoint. And the seventh truth is that truth of balance when we get to that 48 to 52, as I call it. But right now we're identifying that if we try to suppress or castrate our desires, then we're just like the pendulum swinging and we're only living in half a truth. So we have to get very clear and identify what the desires that we have are. And so when we can learn and we can live balance, when we can live in proportion with those desires and only honor them, let's say 50% of the time, I like 48 to 52% of the time, then we can actually balance it with the spirit, which is the other piece of the puzzle. So this brings me to East Meets West, and this is a big platform of mine. I see a lot of clients that are what I call outsourcing their spirit to India. I myself went to India, stayed there for several weeks, studied Ayurveda, Indian philosophy, the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas. The literature is beautiful. However, we are from a Western philosophy. Our psyche is Western, and we really need to have some understanding of our Western values in order to not create complexes in the psyche. So in Greek mythology, there's a famous myth where Athena and Poseidon actually have a fight. They go to the capital of Greece. At the time, it was not Athens. And Athena offers the people material riches via an olive branch, where Poseidon offers spiritual riches. And obviously, in the Western culture, because it's named Athens, Athena won. So the Western civilization, our Western values are actually rooted in materialism. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yes, Indian or Eastern philosophies have more of a spiritual foundation, but they need our material infrastructure because there's a lot of poverty as much as we need their spiritual infrastructure. So it's actually the East meets West, not outsourcing our spirit out to India and assuming that our Western roots were bad. The thing is that Greek philosophy and Greek literature was supplanted by Roman and the Roman Catholic Church. And so a lot of people, by leaving the church and leaving the image of Jesus, the Savior, the Virgin Mary, all of that symbolism, had nowhere else to go but to the East and honor the spirituality and the philosophy of the East. But if we really knew, if we really understood myth and symbol, we would see that they're all saying the same thing. We all have a trimurti. We have Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And again, this isn't from a religious, but more of a philosophical context. That really simply means mind, body, spirit, or positive, negative, neutral from a physics standpoint. And they have the trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. So we see the repetition of patterns. We saw the Vahana in terms of the animal vehicles. Dionysus, one of my favorite gods, is considered the god of wine and pleasures, but actually he is a transgender god. Similar to the Shiva Shakti concept of masculine and feminine or divine god and goddess. All mythologies have these characters. So they're not saying different things, they're just saying it in a different way. And so what we got in terms of Western religion, the Abrahamic religions, they get in a different way. But really, if we break it down to from a metaphysical standpoint or a spiritual concept, it's the same thing. The roots are more Western material, the roots of the East are more spiritual, and we need each other in order to be balanced, which is really what this law of proportion or this truth of desire is all about, needing both. So that brings me to the symbol of Venus. This is the glyph for Venus or Aphrodite. The circle in spirituality and symbolism is always spirit, and the cross is always matter. And this symbol is crucial because for us to be balanced or in right proportion, or like Hercules to ride the bull to the Cyclops, to the temple, therefore achieve our spiritual nature, we need to balance spirit and matter. It's not one over the other, it's not one more than the other, but rather balanced. This circle of spirit balance on the cross of matter. Now, at an astrological sort of low consciousness level, Venus represents sex, beauty, love, romance, sugar, diabetes, things like that, the skin, image, wealth. However, when we look at consciousness, the low-level consciousness, the second chakra, is Eros, and she's actually the mother of Eros or Cupid in mythology. But at a high-level consciousness, she actually rules the fourth chakra, which is agape love. It's love thy neighbor as thyself. So what happens in our society is we don't really have much of a spiritual practice in terms of part of our day or a big part of our day. I'll just say 50%, so to speak. We work, we sleep, we have sex, we do these sort of earthly things, and we work out, we pay attention to our earthly desires. If you think of our bedrooms, we have sex and watch TV, we have an office in our house for our work, we have food, we have a kitchen, but not many people have, like in the Eastern traditions, a room dedicated to an altar to their spiritual life. And in the most impoverished homes in India, you will still see a room or at least a shelf dedicated to an altar and spiritual traditions. Every other day in India, there's a festival for one god or another. That's not our nature here, and that's okay. But we as individuals, in order to balance this spirit and matter, have to give, at least slowly and incrementally, add on more and more time to dedication to the spirit. So for instance, in the morning, all morning I wake up, I listen to the Hanuman Chalisa. It's spiritual high vibration music that I have going on while I do my meditation or my prayers or read some spiritual literature. And you slowly start incrementing the amount of time you dedicate to your spirit within your day. A really good thing is to actually schedule in your calendar blocked out time. A lot of people try to meditate for 20 minutes and that's about it. One of the things that I really like about the truth of thought from last week is that you can do that all day, all the time. You can constantly stopping and analyzing your thoughts. And that's a way of honoring the spirit and giving that 48 to 52 to your spiritual life. So here I just talk about making room in your day for spirit and creating personal space, creating an altar. You can decorate it or not. In Hellenism, a lot of people pick a god of their choice from the pantheon. That's not necessary. If you're really drawn to sort of Greek mythology and Hellenism, that's great. If you are a believer in Buddhism or Buddha or Jesus, I have different relics and icons all over my house. And this brings me to a point, and I don't know if you're familiar with the chakra system, but the sixth chakra and why Hercules brings the bull of desire to the Cyclops, to the temple, is at the sixth chakra, we have something called the Ishvadevatar. Ishvadevatar is God as form. So Jesus, Buddha, Ganesh, Shiva, even if it's just nature spirits like fairies, some form of God in an image. And then in the seventh chakra, we have the formless God. That's when we transcend and transmute all the dogma, all of the philosophy, and we just kind of understand we're one with all. That's very much more advanced in the truths. That's about step 11 that it begins, and step 12. So we're far from that. So oftentimes it's easier for people to have an Ishvadevatar, some sort of form God that they can actually visualize when they're meditating, or people may start out with guided meditation. I myself do chanting. So anything that starts to sort of build the space and create the environment for you to honor your spirit. In the Western world, and this is sort of the problem where we deny our Western values, and I say that the psyche gets like a fissure. We actually develop a complex, which is a Jungian term, when we try to defy our Western values because of the fact that the church sort of, created these symbols that are unattainable. And obviously there's no Virgin Mary, and no woman can be a virgin and be pure and have children and all of that. What happens is that we want to deny our materialistic values and our sexual desires. So what happens is spirit gets lost or veiled and disappears in the attractiveness of the outer form, in the glamour which the soul attracts around itself. Matter is the body, emotions, and thought. So it's not just that matter is the body, it's the emotions. Emotions need a container, and that's part of right action and right thought is controlling the emotions. And we'll get to that in the fourth truth a little bit more. And like we did last week, controlling, of course, the thought, or at least obsessing about where the thoughts come from. So this brings me to values. This desire is directly linked to values. So I invite you to ask yourself, what are your top 2 values? I have a spiritual value sheet. If you want, you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to send those to you. I like for people to tell me their top 2 values. I see that they tend to link to certain parts of the astrological chart when I'm working with people on this particular truth. So I don't want to kind of give that away so that you have some freedom there to pick your top 2 values. But I do have a spiritual value sheet for the spiritual adult, as well as a 0 to 100 worksheet for the values, because oftentimes we say we have a value system, but we've never really actually sat and defined it. And we've actually never adulted with defining and measurable terms. So I invite you to really know your value system. And I have a saying that says, judgments are confessions and they're great. And people will oftentimes start a conversation, I don't want to judge. No, you do want to judge, and judgments are great because they give you insight to what you value. Judgments are simply the other side of the coin. So for instance, if you value hard work, you're going to judge laziness. And sometimes it's really easier to judge and see the other side of the coin, which is what your value really is, and then define it in measurable terms. This is linked to the philosophy of life, or the rule book that I write about in my first book called The 7 Gates, 7 Steps Beyond Self-Awareness. And that workbook is downloadable on my website. It's important that we have a philosophy of life because these are going to be sort of our non-negotiables that we're going to live through life. And we all need non-negotiables. We all need some structure and some rules that we're going to live our life by. So this is Eridanus. This is the river of Judge. And the second constellation, which is linked to the Venus glyph and the myth of Taurus, which is the bull, is related to a constellation called Eridanus, or the river of the judge. And this is a symbol you can see here. It looks kind of like a river coming down. When souls, imagine this sort of when you're not incarnated yet, being incarnated into a body down here. And the task of this lifetime, of every lifetime, is to figure out your own salvation. You'll hear me say, you're not a child of anyone. No one's coming to save you. You're the savior you've been looking for. And so the way that we can save ourselves, first and foremost, is knowing what we think, knowing what we desire, knowing what we judge, why, and that's going to give us the guidance that we need to figure out how to save ourselves and save our own souls. So if you have any questions, feel free to, of course, contact me on the Patreon and the Discord chat, my podcast, my email, my school's email, my website, or my YouTube channel, or my phone number. Thank you very much and have a great day.